This was a very strange class for me. And they happen occasionally. And the best way to describe it is that nothing or nobody shows up. Mostly when I teach, there's an experience of what I call presence. And it kind of floods the system, and it's a very knowing, very wise, very self-directed energy that has nothing to do with Bruce. Today when I sat down, nothing was there. I think the instinct is to say, well, there was just Bruce. But I really didn't sense Bruce was there either. There was a lot of bodily awareness, mostly a kind of tension. And the word that might better describe the experience of teaching was absence. And at first, absence was seeking presence. Because absence is not a comfortable state necessarily. And then the instruction that came within was, be absent. Or just be what is. And there was a clear awareness that it wasn't an enjoyable state, it wasn't a transcendent state, it wasn't a, the word comes up, forgiving state. It was just a kind of pervading, well, if there's a word to describe it, it'd be kind of discomforting, because it wasn't something else. But my instinct was, okay, be the thing it isn't, be whatever's there, and let that connect with people. I just got back from North Carolina and the retreat, the self-inquiry group retreat that I've been to now for 4 years in a row. And the first year I went there, I wasn't sure why I'd been invited. I was very friendly with the man who created the organization. We had spent time together, Bart Marshall and I, and I discovered him through this movie called Closer Than Close, a documentary on a number of awakened people who did not happen to have long hair and beards and turbans or live in the Himalayas. They were just guys who had awakened. And he asked me to come and teach, and I thought, this is very odd, I don't know what I'm teaching, and I'm just teaching what I know is Rudy's work. It certainly didn't have a sense of being awakened. And the experience of that particular class was that I had something to offer. That I had energy work, the years and years of sitting and doing Rudy's work, which was all about chakras opening and being very sensitive to and aware of energy flow and wholeness and completion, psychically, if you will. But I certainly didn't have what they were referring to as awakening. I went the following year, and I was very uncomfortable about going again because I kept saying, well, what am I? And I decided I was the token unenlightened guy. he would come and speak to this group of people, many of whom were awake and some of whom were not, but everyone was seeking that. And as I've said many times in my talks, listening on the last day to one of the speakers, Paul Hederman, the experience at the end of his talk was that something had changed, something had shifted, that the best way to describe it is that Bruce was no longer there. An absence of Bruce, which I must say was quite comforting. I've never imagined that the absence of Bruce would be such a gift, but it was a total gift. Because all of Bruce's elements and conditions and neuroses and all of these things just were gone. And I was deeply, deeply grateful for that. And I spent quite a while in the bliss of that absence and the joy of what is left, which is a sense of self unmodified by a name or personality. And then gradually pieces of Bruce started to get back in the picture, and you've all heard the story who've listened to these talks, and this thing called bruising occurred, and each of you would be a different name, but the personality comes into play again, and you look at it differently. You're no longer as wedded to it, it's just there. And then for me what began to happen was this understanding that I am Bruce and self, and it's all one vast truth. And learning to accept the totality was, for me, the lesson of that year. And then this very dark experience occurred for me, a kind of an experience of the destroyer, if you will, came into play. And it was the destroyer, which I've since named, and other people have named Shiva or Yamataka or Lord of Death or whatever you want to call it, made itself very known to me, and it was a very disturbing thing, and I didn't know what to do with it. And so my response to it, rather than run and hide under the covers, which was what I did when it would appear earlier in my life, I just sat up and sang to it. And I've sang Simon and Garfunkel, Hello Darkness, My Old Friend, and it seemed very surprised by my acknowledgement of it. And it seemed to become rather quiescent as a result. It just went, knows I'm here. And then I did more than acknowledge it. I invited it into my life as part of my being, and it literally moved into the house. It became part of my day-to-day life, and it began to destroy things, which is what it does. It destroys more and more fragments, if you will, of ego mind, and it started to destroy bigger chunks of my own life. I look at it this way. You may not interpret it in the same way, but I considered the failure of the musical on Broadway as a Yamataka event, as a Shiva event. It was taking a huge part of my life away. And the beginning of my experience of that was one of real suffering. And then when it was gone, it was like a deeper, more powerful absence, a more powerful and beautiful freedom inside. When I spoke about my experience with darkness at the third of these self-inquiry group events, people were very disturbed by it. They didn't want the Lord of Death coming into their realm of light. And I became the announcer of darkness. I never wanted to play that role. I don't walk around feeling like I am allied with dark forces. But I appeared to be that to this group. And a lot of people were shaken up by it. On the other hand, they wanted me back again. So I came this last week, and I spoke again, and it was a very strange experience because I was speaking at the exact moment that my musical, the remainder of it in the West End in London, I spoke during the very last hour of its very last performance. So as I was speaking, people were singing these songs for the last time they will be sung on that stage. I knew every line that was being said and sort of moved into the ether as for the last time. And it was very much with me as I spoke. It was a very powerful experience for me, but it didn't make for the best talk. I kind of felt that I was expressing a worldly weight that I'd rather not express when I give these talks. I prefer to be full of presence, and again, I was experiencing and expressing, well, give it the name again, absence. And so for me the talk was not terribly inspiring or inspired, and I felt badly when it was over, and I volunteered not to come back next year because I felt, what more do I have to really bring to this group? But I found out a lot of people were very connected to this dark side and very needful of information about it and how to work with it and what it is. More people than you would expect. I mean, people who really don't know how to deal with their own suffering, really. So in a way it did speak to people, in spite of my sense of its not being a particularly great talk. On the other hand, I was surrounded by people giving what I will call truly great talks. People who had awakened and had matured, really truly matured in their awakening. And it was beautiful to be surrounded by all of these people who brought no drama, no sense of specialness, no sense of knowing the answers to everything in the universe. People who were really, truly self-aware, who understood the mystery at the core of everything, and who understood, all of them, and I have to say the whole collective, there were about 7 or 8 speakers, all of them referring to one thing, which is something that was my last talk here, actually. And I've talked about it a lot in other ways, but it's so powerful that this is it. This very moment, this very space is it, with capital letters and flashing lights and trumpets sounding. This is it. Everything you are looking for in life is here now. And you are that. That was the lesson. It was the constant lesson. You know, it was T.S. Eliot's Four Quatrains. The last line of it, I believe, if I quote it right, is, at the end of your life, you arrive back where you've always been and see it for the first time. And that's really what this awakening experience is like. You suddenly are right here and you just see it. And one of the best descriptors of it was, there were 2 women who were talking who had just awakened in the last 4 months. And neither of them knew why it had happened. Nobody ever does, really. And they didn't know what they would say about it. They were still so fresh to it, they'd never spoken about it in public. And they were sitting together on a couch, and all they kept crying all the time because they were so fresh to it. And one woman just described how it was like the cellophane just came off. And there was no separation between this and that. It was all one thing. And the beauty of that one thing was still causing her to be totally tearful and grateful. And my experience with awakening was also tearful and grateful. And the thing you come to, or seem to come to, is that this is a oneness that cannot be understood. It can't be understood for a number of reasons. One is there's no separate person to understand it. There's only the thing itself, the self-truth. And because it can't be understood, it can only be, if you will, known. And you know it through the things that are most precious to you. You can taste it. You feel your tongue in your mouth. And you know that's it. You hear sound going in and you know that's it. You see, but there's nobody seeing, it's just seeing itself. Self-seeing self. You're breathing God. You're breathing the universe. The body is the very thing that knows this. This is the experience of the truth of God, or life, or being, or what is. And that's an extraordinary thing. The ability to know that you've always been there. The ability to know that you're sitting on yourself. That this pillow here is supporting me. It's supporting. That there is shelter. There is ceiling. And it's cold outside, but it's not cold right here. There's this enormous sense of protectedness, a sense of love and beauty that comes at the core, at the very core of being. And all of these awakened people were just people who knew that. They no longer were searching for God or truth or anything, because they now knew this was it. This is the very thing. It's the very thing you've been looking for. You don't have to go anywhere, you're there. You're tasting it every time you take a cup of coffee or a glass of water. That's it. Every time you blow your nose, you go to the bathroom, you take a shower, you walk out on a cold day and you get a warm coat, or you're freezing, or you scald your hand. That is it. It's not you and it, it's just happening. It's always happening. And where is it happening? Here and now. There's no, where else would it be happening? You can imagine it's happening elsewhere. You turn on the television, which is a little box in your room or a big box in your room, and it shows you pictures of somewhere else. Your newspaper arrives and it talks about all these other places and all these other things. But where is all that knowledge present? Here. In that box. And in that newspaper. And you say, well, through that newspaper, it's proof that there's a world out there. Or the television is showing you pictures of another universe. Or science tells you there's a billion stars out in the heaven, or trillions, zillions of galaxies. But where is all that? It's here. This is it. This is the truth. You are sitting in the truth, walking in the truth, sleeping in the truth. You are the truth itself. And when awakening takes place, all that happens is the saran wrap comes off. And the thing that separates you from that is gone. Just gone. And you live differently. So the problem always is, when you give these talks and when you are in an environment that's talking about awakening, that there are those who have awakened and those who have not yet awakened. And the ones who have not yet awakened are frustrated and envious and jealous. And so what happens is those who haven't awakened either keep pushing into awakening, leaning into it, as one of these speakers said, lean into it, lean into whatever is, lean into your life, lean into your discomfort, lean into it, and you try, or you leave it. You go, it's not happening to me, and you leave your spiritual life behind. You don't make it very important. You make it like going to church. You make it a Sunday morning event. And when you make it a Sunday morning or a casual event or once or twice a year event, the universe won't deliver it. I don't think it will deliver it. Not readily. And it won't deliver it for a number of reasons. If you're a parent and your child comes to you and says, "Oh, Dad, I really want a horse," You go make some money, whatever you do. It's a very dismissive thing. Oh, great, okay. But if they start saying, I want a horse every day, if they cut out pictures of a horse, if they start putting them on the wall, if they start begging you in the morning and begging you at night, and they come at you over and over and over, if they tell you about their best friend who has a horse, if they don't stop talking about it, what do you do as a parent? You get them a horse, usually, or you work it out so they can have a horse. Because when somebody wants something that badly, you may make them really dig and work, but in the end, a father or a mother desperately wants to give children what they want. And the mere fact that they say they want something gives it clarity, and you can give them what they want. If a child comes to you and kind of says, well, I kind of want this or that, well, you go, great. Because you can't give something that you kind of want. It's meaningless. But you give what you want. And if you really want this awakening, which is for most people an abstract, obscure thing, you don't even know what you're asking for, but you know you want it. It has something to do with truth, with reality, and you say you want it. And you say it enough and enough. How can that which you are not grant that? In the end, I believe, of course, it's granted to every entity that's ever existed. Awakening occurs. It's just the nature of it. It's just the way a leaf falls off a tree. We had very cold weather the other night, and all of the leaves on the tree over our patio, all of them froze. I will tell you right now, they probably did not enjoy freezing. They probably said, this is not good. This doesn't feel right, except maybe if there was some cellular memory of what freezing means, but it meant they're going to die. And all of these leaves hung on and hung on and hung on and hung on. And then there comes a point where you can't hang on anymore. You just can't do it. The cold is too intense. And what happens is, you let go and you float to the ground, and you're done. You're done. You return to the soil, you return to the very nutrient that makes that tree grow. And each one of us will do that at some point, whether it's physical death or whether it's spiritual awakening. It's the same thing, really. In the end, you're done. Your job is done. And you can sit there on that tree going, why me, I'm freezing, I'm freezing. Or you can go, aha, aha. And you freeze consciously. You just freeze consciously. You let it do its work. And you just become liberated by not fighting what is. And you fall off. One falls off with a state of grace, the other falls off with, why me, God? But you fall off, and you're free. Spiritual practice is something that we all hear about. And spiritual practice is what you do until you're doing it without practicing. You practice playing tennis until you play tennis. You practice running until you're just running. You practice drawing until you're an artist. Practice is what people do. We all practice. And spiritual practice is enormously valuable. You practice surrender. You practice letting go. You practice acceptance. You practice forgiveness. You practice loving others. You practice loving yourself. Go on and on. There's a big list of spiritual practices that one can do. Some people take huge deep breaths over and over and over to free something inside. That's fine. Rudy gave us a breathing exercise, and you took a breath and you asked for help to surrender, to let go. Practice, practice. And then awakening occurs, and what happens? The same thing, except you're not practicing, you're doing it. You're just doing it. You're not just practicing anymore because there's no practice. It's real. You're living a spiritual life. Spiritual life is the life of being, not trying to be. There's no you doing, it's doing. So the beauty of spiritual practice is that your life will look in every possible way like a realized life. You will live with love, you will live with forgiveness, you will live with compassion, you will live with openness, you will live in a state of surrender, all because you practiced. So when awakening occurs, the shift will be so minuscule that it won't feel like anything happened at all, except there won't be you trying to do anything, and there won't be you practicing anything. There'll just be you, or the self, being. And it will be compassionate, loving, forgiving, available, accepting, all of these things. And you'll see it just happens with no effort at all. It just is. So, the thing one can give as a spiritual teacher is a practice that one can do until awakening occurs. And if awakening doesn't occur, you will be living so close to the awakening experience that it almost won't matter. Realized or not realized, you're there. You're there. You will eat your food with some real joy and taste. You will look out at the world around you and you will enjoy the beauty of life that pours through your eyes. You will hear music with real hearing. You won't sit there and listen to music thinking about a million other things. You'll sit there and you'll listen to music. Life through practice becomes something very remarkable. I have met people who have awakened without having this practice, without having really a deep practice. And what happens is they still need to go through all of this stuff. They still need to, in a sense, learn to see, although now it's not going to be a practice. They'll be being taught. They'll be taught by the experience of the awakened self. The awakened self teaches everything that you didn't learn through your own personal separate practice. That's the beauty of it. But in the end, you still got to get there. You still have to, even awakened souls have to have hearts and have to learn to open them. And I've met awakened people with closed hearts, and they're aware of it. And they have to go in, they don't have to, but part of the natural process of awakening is this heart will start to open. If you've been sitting doing this work for a length of time, very likely your heart's already there. So is your belly, so is your mind, so is your ego mind. All of you is already there. It's just cellophane hasn't quite been peeled away yet. But it will be. They were selling hats at the SIG, Self-Inquiry Group, meeting. And instead of having, say, be present typed on the top of the hat, they said, be absent. Be absent. So that came into the brain as I was teaching, because I taught this class from absence. When I say I, there was no presence in the room. There was an absence of presence. And that is as meaningful as presence. I'll tell you what's really important. It's just accepting what is. And if you want to walk around saying spirituality is being present, then you have defined it as opposed to being absent. Spirituality is whatever shows up. Whatever is. And that's the great lesson. What is, is. You can fight it, you can say no, you can say it should be other, but that's just you separating from isness. The whole idea is lean into it. Lean into the thing that is. If there is pain, if there is suffering, you can try running every direction you want, but the only way to deal with pain is to lean into it. The only experience that will be meaningful is lean into it. Running from it will never be meaningful. Running from what is will always cause you suffering. The only, if you will, end to suffering is acceptance of suffering. Because it allows you to become one with it rather than separate from it. The idea of being separate from suffering is suffering. When you're one with it, there's no one to suffer. There is no one to experience suffering. There is only suffering. And what is suffering? Well, it's a sort of doorway. It's a sort of doorway that nobody wants to enter that leads you to oneness. You have to be willing to enter it and go, thy will be done. And nobody wants to, you know. Christ himself, you know, moving toward the cross, standing in the Garden of Gethsemane, said, please take this cup from my lips. Did not want to go there, into suffering. Nobody wants to go into suffering. But it is what it is. Life is what it is. Every moment is what it is. And it's completely variable. And it's as I've said before, it's a rich stew of stuff. So it's never completely comfortable or completely uncomfortable, usually, until it becomes very strongly one thing or another. But that usually doesn't last. But whatever it is, it is. And the awakened being is that. You are what is, period. And every person who speaks about awakening speaks about that truth. It is the closest thing in the world. What is. And what is the thing you've been looking for from day one, and it is not separate from you. You are one with it, totally. So, for those of you who are teachers, if you sit down and there is absence as opposed to presence, don't think of it as wrong. Don't think of it as it should be different. Don't think that you should, to be a worthy teacher, be this or be that. Just show up. Just show up, period. What is, will teach. What is, will be present. Be that, don't run from it, and it will speak its truth. And if it speaks its truth, it will be recognized as truth. And if it's recognized, it will start to weave its way into the DNA of those who hear it. And at some point, that DNA will be one with truth, or will know it's one with truth. Because nobody isn't one with it. That's why they call it realization. It's just realize it. Realize it. You know, you can't realize it. I had this image this morning of a puppet. You know, hello. Little two eyes here. How are you? I want to wake up. I really want to wake up. Can I wake up, please? Can I wake up? It's this stupid little puppet going, I want to wake up. That's us. That's us. And then suddenly the self goes, what do you mean? What do you mean? You're just my hand. You know, you're just my hand making sounds. That's all you are. And you just go, oh, I'm just this kind of like a puppet. The puppet can't wake up. That which is controlling the puppet, that which is the dreamer, as opposed, that which is dreaming wakes up, not the thing that's dreamt. The waking up is just looking at this thing and going, you're just an extension of me. You can't wake up, I have to wake up. And then, oh, done. So, if you're frustrated by this talk, it's probably not a bad thing. If you're not frustrated by it, that's fine. All I can tell you is, if you're here in this space, or if you're listening to this talk, something in you has brought you to this moment. This moment is what is. This moment is speaking its own truth. And at any moment you can listen to this truth and go, ah. Ah. any questions.